On this episode of the show, we look at home ground advantage across a range of sports, football, rugby, and Test cricket, and attempt to answer the question, how important is home ground advantage, really? Welcome to the Luke Alfred Show. I have 30 years of experience on the front lines of sports journalism, covering some of the biggest games in cricket, rugby, the FIFA World Cup, and even the Olympic Games. Come and join me as we learn about some of the greatest sports stories you've never heard. I'm Luke Alfred, and welcome to the show. Before we kick off with this week's sports story, I'd like to tell you about an open role with the Luke Alfred Show. We are looking for a digital marketer to join our team. We aim to introduce our superb product to a larger audience. Please see the details in the show notes. Playing home and away was once almost laughably straightforward. At home, in front of your fans, on a familiar pitch or ground, you were expected to win. In an age of amateur referees, even they might have expected you to win. Sometimes there was collusion between parties. This could be subtle, such as a running tab at the bar afterwards, but it could also be grossly overt, with all manner of knickknacks, perks, and holidays being paid for by the home side. Home grounds were often in the towns where the footballers or rugby players lived, so it was no time for social loafing. This was your community. If you didn't pull your weight, if you loafed, in other words, hiding behind the cohesion of the whole, you would be told all about it. Away, well, that was something different. Given that away for you was home for someone else, you faced all those subtle and not so subtle features that you made great advantage of when you were at home. Away matches were best endured. Yes, they could be prepared for, but nothing fundamentally good came out of them. You might reasonably expect an away draw. An away draw was, in fact, a good result for the visiting team. It wasn't a win, but it felt like one, a moral victory on the road. At least, this was the sleight of hand that a draw on the road was dressed up as. So ran the script for many years. Home was to be taken advantage of, where winning usually took place, while away matches were there to be got through rather than enjoyed. But about 20 years ago, give or take a year or two, the entrenched home and away narrative changed dramatically. In some sports, it changed more dramatically than others, as we are about to see. The rate and scale of change depended largely on the sport, but in football and rugby, away visits suddenly didn't look so daunting. Good visiting teams began to expect to put up a good showing away from home and even win on the road. This made football and rugby spicier. We will get to why in a moment, but the transition from home as a castle with moat to home as an open house can be easily illustrated with the following two statistics. In 1994-05, Blackburn Rovers, with Alan Shearer in their midst, won the Premier League title. It was, in relation to our home and away thesis, what might be termed classic home and away stuff. 30 years ago, the English League season consisted of 42 matches, 21 at home and 21 away. Of their 21 home matches, Blackburn won 17 of them with 2 draws and 2 losses. On the road, they won 10 of their 21 matches. This patchy away form perhaps accounts for why Rovers only won the league that season in dramatic circumstances by 1 point from Manchester United, although on closer examination that's not quite it. Manchester United, like Rovers, only won 10 times out of a potential 21 times on the road. In fact, the reason Blackburn Rovers won the Premiership title over Manchester United and Nottingham Forest in 1994-05 was simple. They won more matches than both of them, 1 more than United and 5 more than Forest. As we've just seen, Manchester United's away form was, in fact, identical to that of Blackburn Rovers. The Blackburn win in the league can be taken as representative or paradigmatic of how things used to be in football as far as the usual home and away scenario was concerned. 10 years later, and the statistics, however, tell an altogether different story. The 2004-05 English Premiership season, for example, was won by Chelsea. Unlike what was the case in Blackburn's league-winning season, there were no longer 42 matches in a cycle, but 38 matches in a cycle. Of their 19 matches at home, Chelsea won 14 of them and drew 5. They were not beaten at home all season. In the away column, though, Chelsea's record in the 2004-05 season begins to look really interesting. Unlike Blackburn's average away form 10 seasons previously, Chelsea actually won more matches away in 2004-05 than they did at home. 15 matches all told, compared to their 14 wins at home. Yes, they lost once on the road and drew 3 times, but they scored exactly the same number of goals away from home as they did at home, 38 of them. For the statistically minded, they actually garnered more points away from home, 48 compared to the 47, to give them the league title. This they did over second-place Arsenal by 12 points and Manchester United in third. So, what happened in the 10 years between Blackburn Rovers' Premiership-winning title 30 years ago and Chelsea's 20 years ago in 2004-05? The most obvious answer to the question was that wins became worth 3 points. In the old matrix, where away assignments were often undertaken not to lose rather than to win, an away win only counted for 1 more point than an away draw. Why ride the bus when you could park it? Now, suddenly, with the advent of an extra point, a win became an attractive proposition. An extra point on offer made striving for an away win more attractive than playing out a conservative away draw. There were other reasons. The period between Blackburn winning the league and Chelsea winning the league saw the emergence of London as a European city attractive to billionaires like India's Lakshmi Mittal and the Malaysian Tony Fernandes. When Blackburn won the league, they were owned by Jack Walker, British industrialist, who bankrolled the club and galvanized them with a 2-word, slightly underachieving provincial motto, quote, "Think big." When Chelsea won the title 10 years later, they were owned by Roman Abramovich, who had bought the club for £140 million in 2003, shortly before Chelsea won the title. Rumour has it that Abramovich was not even particularly besotted with Chelsea as a club. He just rather fancied owning a London-based football club, and Chelsea happened to be closest to his new home in nearby Eaton Square. Forgive me while I interrupt a sports story to tell you about the Luke Alfred Show Patreon. As you may know, being a writer is not the most lucrative career choice. Please consider making a small donation to keep the show going at patreon.com/The Luke Alfred Show. But for now, let's get back to the story. Contrast to the Kenny Dalglish managed Blackburn when they won the Premiership title in 1994-05 with the Jose Mourinho managed Chelsea when they won the title 10 years later. Mourinho was one of the happening gaffers in Europe, if not the man, period, when he took over at Chelsea, having just won the Champions League title with Porto. Chelsea was a club in London, a cosmopolitan city Europeans wanted to come and live in, rather than one in the declining north, like Blackburn. Witness the players who won the title with Blackburn, mainly Englishmen with a couple of Aussie and Irish lads thrown in, with the cast who did duty for the Stamford Bridge lot 10 years later. Blackburn under Dalglish was the side of Shearer, Tim Sherwood and Graham Lasso, one of the few players with a whiff of something cosmopolitan about him. Shearer was notable not only for his speed and his goal-scoring ability, but he was English football's first £3 million player. How quaint does that sound today, when he was sold by Southampton to Rovers back in July 1992. Shearer knew how to make an impression. He scored on debut for his new club, Blackburn, and when he was joined at Rovers by Chris Sutton, who was bought from Norwich City, a couple of seasons after he arrived from Southampton, he found the perfect partner with Think Big Rovers, winning the title. Here's a clip from a documentary about that famous Blackburn season. The first voice, where he clicks his fingers, is Shearer's, and the second voice is that of Sherwood's, when he talks about the Shearer-Sutton striking partnership.
Magnificent goal! It's Chris Sutton. Shearer for Sutton. A sensational start here for Blackburn Rovers.
I've always felt the best partnerships are the ones that you've never really had to work at. It's just sort of clicked, it happened.
Yeah, they ended up being a wonderful partnership. I was going to say when Alan didn't score, he did, but Alan scored every week.
Oh, lovely goal. Brilliant Blackburn play.
The master striker has done it again.
We were flying, we were enjoying our football. What we had better than anyone else was an unbelievable team spirit.
Shearer, Sutton, Shearer for Sherwood. He's in. Oh, lovely goal. Brilliant Blackburn play.
Man United knew we were coming for them. We were gunning for them.
Contrast the Blackburn roster with what Mourinho had at his beck and call. 10 years after Blackburn's title, the special one, for example, had Portuguese players at his disposal, players with whom he was culturally, if not emotionally, familiar. One such player was Ricardo Carvalho, whom Mourinho brought with him from Porto. The transfer fee was approximately tenfold what Dalglish and Rovers had paid for Shearer 10 years earlier, coming in at an estimated €30 million. Carvalho was not the only Portuguese player in Chelsea's ranks under Mourinho. The former Porto boss raided Porto stocks for Thiago and Paulo Ferreira. They also had Frenchmen, including Claude Makélélé and William Gallas, an Ivorian in Didier Drogba, and a Cameroonian in Jeremy. Most notably for Mourinho, who was never one to overlook his defensive spine, they had one of the finest goalkeepers in the world in Petr Cech. I've left out the Englishmen in Chelsea's squad that season. Let's not forget John Terry, Joe Cole, and Frank Lampard, to give 3 examples. Chelsea's was more than a pan-European squad, it was an international squad. Blackburn's squad was straightforwardly British. One of the reasons for this was that the European Court of Justice's Bosman ruling, which allowed a player to pursue his professional calling anywhere in Europe, only came into effect in 1995, 3 years after Dalglish bought Shearer. Finally, Mourinho also had his not inconsiderable ego to keep him company. In the unlikely event that you've forgotten Mourinho's particular flavour of bombast, here's a clip from his very first Chelsea press conference.
I have to say this. We have top players. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit arrogant. We have a top manager. Again, please don't call me arrogant, because what I'm saying is true. I'm European champion, so I'm not one of the bottle. I think I'm a special one.
In 10 years, life on the road had also changed. It had changed because the English game had changed. It had become part of Europe, outward as opposed to inward looking. As a result, it had become more ambitious. Your ambition didn't grow in a vacuum. Other big clubs, like Manchester United and Arsenal, were becoming more ambitious too. Ambition meant many things, but one of them was not being content to settle for humdrum away draws and rationalize them as wins. Interestingly, Porto, the club at which Mourinho made his name before Chelsea, were more Blackburn Rovers than they were Chelsea, which should caution us against too many breezy generalizations. They were more Rovers than Chelsea when they won both the Portuguese League and the Champions League in 2003-04, in that they had a majority of Portuguese players, the one obvious exception to this being Benny McCarthy. Of further interest is the fact that Porto were literally unbeatable at home when they won the league title from Benfica under Mourinho, but their away form was of the standard production model variety. They won only 8 of their 17 away matches, as opposed to winning all 17 at home. True, they only lost twice away, but the Mourinho mindset was very much not to lose on the road. Indeed, Porto drew 7 times away. There was another, perhaps definitive reason for the away win becoming more commonplace. Between Blackburn's win in 1994-5 and Chelsea's win of the title 10 years later, the First Division became the English Premiership. It was, in the language of the day, rebranded, a slave to the dictates of TV. With rebranding came more money from sponsorship and the slice of the broadcast rights pie, and with more money came more incentive to stay up and to win. While winning on the road became commonplace in English football 20 years ago, a situation now accepted as fact, Test cricket was moving in an entirely different direction. We can be specific to within 6 months about when this changed, and to tell the story of this change, we can look at 2 series 6 months apart, one in England and one in India. In the South African winter of 2012, Graham Smith and Mickey Arthur took the Proteas to England. The first test of the series was at the Oval, after Mark Boucher had damaged his eye so badly in the early game against Somerset that it put paid to the rest of his international career. England reached nearly 400 batting first on the back of Alistair Cook's century at the Oval, which might have been enough to ensure they didn't lose. Unfortunately for them, South Africa passed it in their first innings. The Proteas scorecard is worth repeating because it's almost comically one-sided. South Africa scored 637 for 2, of which Alviro Peterson scored 0, Smith 131, Jacques Kallis 182 not out, and Hashim Amla 311 not out, the highest test score ever by a South African. Amla walked to the crease just before tea on the second afternoon, a Friday, and batted until after tea on the Sunday, 2 days later. It took him, wait for it, 529 balls. It was an innings for which he'd practiced and obsessed for weeks beforehand, hitting balls by the 100 in the nets and indoor nets across England, come rain or shine. England could only muster 240 in their second dig, Dale Steyn taking 5 wickets and Imran Tahir 3, as the visitors won the opening test by an innings and 12 runs. The second test of the series was drawn, and at Lord's, in the final test of 3, South Africa won narrowly to take a 2-0 away series victory. 6 months later, and England found themselves in India. England's form had been patchy in the year before going to India. Not only had they lost to South Africa, but 6 months prior to that, and they'd lost a test series 3-0 to Pakistan in the United Arab Emirates, where several of their players, including Kevin Peterson, revealed a frailty against left-arm spin. For their assignment in India, they picked a very similar side to the one that had done duty against South Africa, adding the spinners Monty Panesar and Samit Patel. The first test was in Ahmedabad. India batted beautifully, Virender Sehwag scoring a century, and Cheteshwar Pujara scoring 206 not out. In reply, England was spun out for 191, well over 300 runs adrift of India's first innings score. They did far better in their second dig, digging themselves out of a not inconsiderable hole. Cook scored a patient 176, and Matt Pryor, the wicketkeeper, a pugnacious 91, but it wasn't enough. England lost the first test by 9 wickets. What happened between the first and the second tests has to count as one of the most remarkable test turnarounds of all time. India batted first at the Wankhede Stadium in Mumbai, Pujara again to the fore, with a top score of 135 in India's 3-2-7. The total gave England hope. With the England total on 68 for 2, Peterson came out to join Cook, who was captaining the side because Peterson had demonstrated that he couldn't captain it. The two put on a third-wicket partnership of 206, Peterson going on to score 186 in only 233 balls, England scoring 413. Peterson later put the innings in broader perspective. Quote, "My biggest struggle was DRS. Before it came into play, I could get away with using my height and taking a long stride forward. A lot of umpires used to say, too tall, too far forward, we can't be sure, so it's not out. But after DRS, we started to be given out LBW on the front foot. Umpires became a lot more confident about doing it, and I realized I couldn't whip balls through mid-wicket and think I've a second line of defense here with my pad. After the introduction of DRS, I realized I had to use my bat more. Whereas I had been a leg side player, I started to hit through the offside much more. It actually made me a better player in the end." With their 100-odd run first innings lead, England were able to exert pressure on India for the first time in the series. Panesar and Graham Swan shared all 10 wickets between them, with Gautam Gambhir scoring 65 of India's 142 runs. It was never enough. England polished off the deficit to win by 10 wickets and square the series with 2 tests to play. The third test was at the veritable Eden Gardens in Kolkata, India again batting first and again failing to make enough of it, posting 316. As in Mumbai, England passed India's first innings total. On the back of Cook's grinding 190 and 50s from Nick Compton, Jonathan Trott and Peterson, England stockpiled 5-3 at more than 3 runs to the over. As they had done in their second innings at the Wankhede, India capitulated in their attempt to polish off the deficit. The details are unimportant. England batted again for an hour or two and won the test. They were 2-1 up with 1 to play after having lost the first test badly. The fourth test was drawn. England had done the unthinkable and won a test series in India. India haven't lost a test series at home since, a streak of 12 years and 15 series all told. India, like England at home and Australia at home, haven't been beaten in a series at home for an awfully long time. Why should this be? Is home ground advantage and the preparation of home ground wickets really that determining? Have teams simply forgotten how to play Test cricket, particularly away from home? Are series too short, with little opportunity to rectify a poor start if, say, you are playing in a 2-test series, as South Africa now frequently does? Is the inability of Test teams to win away from home somehow systemic or institutional, insofar as Test cricket is often devalued in the poorer nations, leading to a concentration on white ball cricket? The declining status of players like Amla and Cook, instrumental in their respective teams' away victories in 2012, surely has something to do with it. Amla prepared for his Oval innings assiduously and thought about nothing else for weeks on end. Cook was not a white ball cricketer. I show him no disrespect to suggest as much, but he was a red ball opener of peerless concentration, uncommon grit, and no fear of the short ball. Upon the rock of such foundations are Test victories, home and away, painstakingly built. With the eclipse of Test cricketers like Cook and Amla was also a very fine ODI cricketer, let's not forget, has come an eclipse in the ability to play Test cricket. South Africa's trip to Australia for a 3-test series recently was nothing short of a disaster. Teams might play in Test cricket matches, but this doesn't mean they appear to understand the format. Witness the lack of draws in Test cricket nowadays. The pat answer to the reason why draws aren't a feature of Tests anymore is that cross-pollination from white ball cricket has imbued Test cricket with greater flair and adventure. That's no doubt true. But might one of the reasons as to why we aren't seeing draws anymore be that the sometimes attritional arts of Test cricket are being lost? The skills that allow sides to draw matches are part of the same range of skills that allow them to win them. Finally, as if to confound matters, the home and away debate is being kept alive by the Rugby Championship. So far this season, we've had 8 matches. Of the 8, 3 have been away wins. The Springboks beating the Wallabies twice in Australia and Los Pumas beating the All Blacks once in New Zealand. Of the 5 home wins, some of them have been perilously close. Australia beating Argentina by a point 2 weeks ago, and the South Africans scoring tight but deserved victories over the All Blacks over 2 consecutive weekends at Ellis Park and the Cape Town Stadium. What does this all mean? Perhaps rugby union is going the way of football at the elite level, where home ground advantage isn't what it used to be. This certainly seems to be borne out by World Cups, which is only home ground advantage of a particular kind, admittedly. We have to go back to 2011, in fact, to find a World Cup host winning the tournament, when the All Blacks beat France by a point in the final in Auckland. The 2015 World Cup was in England, with the All Blacks and the Wallabies contesting the final. The 2019 World Cup was in Japan, with the Springboks and England contesting the final. And the 2023 World Cup was in France, with the Springboks and the All Blacks in last year's final. Home ground advantage. Maybe it isn't all it's cut up to be. If you enjoyed this episode of The Luke Alfred Show, please give me a 5-star rating. As an independent creator, this podcast is made possible through your support.